Hey everybody, welcome to the program, WRSA Radio. I'm your host, G1. As always, hope you're having a good week. It has been a rough one for the old celebrities, hasn't it? This week we've lost Hulk Hogan, Ozzy Osbourne, Malcolm Jamal Warner, Chuck Mangione, as well as George Kooymans, who was the founder of the band Golden Earring. I agree with Concerned American on this one. I do like the song Twilight Zone, but man, Radar Love is just a banger. That is a banger. That's a great song to listen to. Summer evening, early summer or late summer when it's cool at night. Crack the windows, blasting down the road at about 80 miles an hour, pumping out that song. Yeah, that's good stuff. Good stuff. So a lot of well-known people shuffling off this mortal coil, which kind of makes me feel old, I think. But anyway, let's move on to some more upbeat, at least in a way, information. Let's talk a little bit about the old Epstein Files situation again, and it's kind of becoming a worn-out topic at this point, sadly. This is one of those things that is kind of hard because you don't want to kind of give in to ignoring this, okay, and just shuffling it around and just not even paying any attention to it, but it's worn out because there's just not a whole lot of new information out there. And you can't just keep going over the same stuff again. But I wanted to highlight a post from over on the mothership the other day in case you missed it, because I think this is important. And it's the one theory, or at least a part. I'm going to say that this theory could be a part of the greater story. It's the one thing that really... it makes sense outside of the obvious, this was an Israeli honey trap and we don't want to embarrass Israel. This, I think, is part of that. And it's not inconsistent with the honey trap theory. It's just an augment to it. The other day, Concerned American posted a link on WRSA, the big page, the mothership. He posted a link to Naomi Wolf's Substack and her article going into the kind of the deeper parts of the Epstein affair, some of the history that she personally witnessed. Okay, her agent was a friend of Epstein and a confidant, I guess. And so she saw some of these things taking place. If you missed this, please take some time, go over to WRSA and read that article. Just jump back to last weekend, find that link, read it, and then come back over here to the show and finish listening out. So, reading this, she makes a point very similar to the one that I made a couple of episodes back when Trump first came out and said, can't release these files. But she provides, like I said, some additional details to this, some of her own personal experience. And what we see emerge is that Epstein had a very wide-ranging circle of people. He was moving in many spheres, and he attracted an array of really smart people, tech people who were deep thinkers and scientific minds. And we kind of got a hint of that when we first started learning about some of the people that were on the flights, and we heard about Stephen Hawking's being associated with him. Many of these people, in fact, I would suggest most of these people, knew Epstein and were associated with him because he was providing funding to their programs and their projects. He was somebody who took a lot of money out of these financial markets and funds and things that he managed, and they were putting that money into these research programs. And there's no doubt in my mind that he was providing that funding in exchange for early access to the information, or even exclusive access to that information or the technology or whatever that came out of these tech projects. And I have no doubt that he was then using that information in various ways. He was perhaps taking information from one program, discoveries, technology from one program, and giving it to other big brain people to move their projects along. He was providing information to Israel and their industrial leaders, their industrial base there. Israel, by the way, is the largest, outside of China, the largest industrial spies in the United States. They are constantly looking and prying into and digging into companies to learn their secrets and do what they will with them. And he was likely channeling that information to people that would make him more money along the way. This was not... I think there was an aspect to Epstein of a little bit of altruism, but he was definitely doing this to make money. Don't be mistaken. And now this gets kind of into that adage of you pay the piper, you pick the tune. If he was providing this funding, it's not out of the question that he was, expecting to get access to the results. And the problem is that there were also other entities involved. It's not such a big deal that, if you're funding the study or you're funding the project, that you would benefit and reap the rewards from that. But if you were doing that in addition to these schools and academic institutions that were also funding this, or that were allowing these projects to take place under their roofs, then you're kind of hoarding in on their claim to this information. And if you were doing this in addition to government funding that was coming in from U.S. taxpayers, the question kind of gets down to it is, well, who had first dibs on that information? Was he gaining leverage and getting buying access to this information before it was being shared with the other benefactors of these programs? It's kind of an interesting question. And I think what it all kind of comes down to is, we learn from this is, among the other things that Epstein was doing, he was an industrial spy. Now, this becomes a problem for the people who were involved with these projects. They were in his circle because he was a donor and a funder of these projects. So they were no doubt at fundraisers and dinners and parties and social events where he was at. They got their picture taken with him, I'm sure. They met him. They rubbed elbows with some of the other people that were in his circle. But it was because of the money that he brought to the table. It wasn't because they were involved in anything, of a criminal nature, at least involving trafficking. Let's put it that way. We don't want to anger the algorithm on YouTube by delving too deep into that topic. But the point is we should not assume that the majority of these people had anything to do with those more vulgar aspects of Epstein's lifestyle. But that's just not how people think, okay? Most people will leap to the conclusion that anyone ever photographed with Epstein, was a pedo, and that Epstein had manipulative control over them. We've already seen that with people, going after Donald Trump, and and this is very likely at the heart of why Trump is withholding this information right now. Again, in addition to the embarrassment that this would provide for Israel. His name is in those files. We know that. But I have no reason to think that he did anything wrong. And every reason to believe that had he been exposed by some of that information that was in those files, that it would have been outed already. And I think it has been. I think we've learned everything there is to learn about the extent of Donald Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. They certainly were both New York socialites. They were running in some of the same circles of people, so there was an overlap there. They were seen at the same parties and gatherings and things like that. But so were a lot of other people that never had anything to do with him or have ever been accused of doing anything with Epstein. We know that Epstein at one point had been coming to Mar-a-Lago, and had stayed there, been to some parties and things like that. But that when Trump learned about accusations against Epstein, he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago. He doesn't want anything to do with that. I think for everything that Donald Trump is, he's a businessman. I don't think for one second that he gets himself involved and exposed to that kind of manipulation from other people. It's not like him to do that. It just doesn't seem to be consistent with how he has behaved, or how he has put himself out in the past. So I don't think that Trump has anything other than what is already out there to worry about from those files. I think he is more concerned with what this does to U.S.-Israel relation, and in this case, what it might do to some of his supporters' reputations. This would have been, how they manipulated Trump into not running for a second term. They would have just said, look, Donald, we don't want you in office, and if you run, we're going to leak this information. If there was anything really bad there, we'll clean out everything in the files that harms our people, and we'll put it out, and all of you and your Republican buddies will be left holding the bag for this. The Dems, the deep state, they had control of this information for 4 years or longer, and none of it was released to damage Trump. Okay. If it had been, that would have been it. He would have just said, hey, I know everybody wants me to run, but I'm getting old, and they have it out to get me in court, so I'm not going to run. And it would have been far less trouble for him. Doesn't make much sense to me, like I said, that Trump would be in those files other than to talk about the things that we already knew with him and Epstein. But I think he knows that he and all of these innocent people will be guilty in the eyes of many people by association. And Naomi Wolf goes into that in her article and highlights that many of these tech guys are now Trump supporters, and they're likely putting pressure on him to keep their names out of the press, keep this information from getting out to prevent them from being shamed, and even though they didn't do anything to deserve it. And I can sympathize with that. How many people out there knew someone who later turned out to be kind of horrible? Maybe they had committed a crime that you didn't know about, or domestic violence or other things that you just didn't know about. They were never that way around you. Maybe they said some things that you kind of, squinted your eyes at a little bit and were like, what was that all about? But you just kind of brushed it off because you didn't really want to go down that rabbit hole for no reason, okay? I think most people are like that. Maybe you just didn't want to know them beyond just a casual interaction that you had with them. Maybe, again, same social circles or something like that. You didn't really think too much of it. And then something happens. Maybe it's something very serious that law enforcement gets involved with, and this person is now exposed as being really terrible. And I think most people would spend some amount of time to make sure that everyone they know is aware that, hey, I didn't know anything about that. I was totally unaware. I'm shocked. I'm just as shocked as everybody else about this. I just think that's a natural reaction. Most people don't want to be associated with people when something like that comes out, at least until a lot of time has passed. I think, we have a capacity for forgiveness to an extent, depending on what the offense is. And if you had the opportunity to keep something like that from ever really being made public, I think a lot of people would want to keep their names uninvolved with stuff like that. And I'm not talking about people who were actually compromised by Epstein. People like, they should be criminally prosecuted. They should be punished to the fullest extent of the law, and probably punished in illegal ways. I'm just talking about people who knew him but had no real idea what he was doing. How many of you can differentiate between the two? Are there people that look at the list, we see like the flight logs of the plane, you just assume that, well, everybody that was on that plane is guilty of something. Not necessarily. I mean, I think I've talked about this before. There are people that never have to, the manipulation doesn't ever need to go that extreme. Some people just like to party, just like to have a good time. Maybe he gave them drugs. Maybe there were adult women involved. That might have been all of the extent to it that there was for some of these people. Maybe there was nothing involved. Maybe it was just, hey, I know other people and I'll bring them into your circle. That might have been it. Some people have really low price tags. That's not necessarily illegal. It's not the extent of what Epstein was really doing and what he was capable of. So I think it's fun to share the memes and laugh at the funny stuff, but if you were faced with your reputation being trashed because you knew a guy who was a piece of shit and that was it, if you just because you knew him, how would you want that to go down? Me personally, I would want to get out in front of it. I think if I was a celebrity, particularly some of these celebrities that we've seen on these lists, I would want to be like, hey, look, here's what I knew, here's how things were. So just so there'd be no doubt that I didn't know anything about, this, anything but the public persona of this person. And that way, when information came out later, nobody would be shocked that, oh, you did know this person. Your name's in this information. Yeah, well, I told you I did. I was upfront about it. Be honest, be upfront about it. I think people respect that, and that people that did that would not be viewed negatively in the eyes of the public. The fact that people aren't doing that kind of does speak a little bit of volume to, the kind of manipulation that he was doing to people. So yeah, he's a bad dude. He was a bad dude, just no question about it. But I think that like I said, we have to be very careful when we start talking about throwing open the curtains and exposing all the information. The DOJ would need to be very public and upfront and clear that, look, some of these people were not suspected or accused or even associated with anything criminal, although their names might appear in this information. You've got to cover your bases to prevent any kind of slander and libel against people who are innocent. Anyway, that's enough for that topic. We're going to see how it unfolds. I believe that Trump will eventually release this information. I think there's another aspect to it of he's trying to kind of throw this into the hands of the judicial side of things. And so he can't be seen as the one that releases it. He's trying to kind of ride the fence on it of, hey, I don't want to offend my base, but I don't want to offend my donors either. And to be frank, when it comes to between the base and the donors, at this point, he's more apt to side with the donors. He's not running for office again. He doesn't quite need the base as much as he needs the donors. So I think you're going to see this reluctance from him. But I think on the other side of it is he wants to put that into the hands of somebody else to make the call of, okay, yeah, the information's going to come out, but it wasn't because I just allowed it to come out. I tried to protect your names, and this happened anyway. I think that's kind of where he's at. But anyway, I think there's one other thing that is also going on here, and that is I think there's this desire to not have the Epstein problem overshadow or interfere with this public investigation of Obama and the fake Russian interference, Russia hoax story. That's gaining legs. It's growing in attention, and I think that there was a pressure on Trump to release the Epstein information, but he wanted to focus on Obama and the Russia hoax. We know how that went down, and now we have information that has been made public, and there are criminal referrals to the DOJ from Tulsi Gabbard. We don't know if anything will ever come of that because, that's how Washington is. They'll put special prosecutor, special counsel, whatever, special committees in Congress, and all of that is just a whitewash. It's a way to, we're going to have, a public trial, but no one's ever criminally going to be held responsible for those things. That's just how Washington is, and that's probably the route that this will go down. But I think we will get a public airing of the story and what happened, and so people's reputations will be damaged. I don't think anybody's ever criminally going to face any charges. Could be surprised by that. Maybe Clapper, maybe Brennan, maybe Comey, but I'm not holding my breath for it. We'll see. Anyway, we watch these stories and we follow them as they unfold. That is all I have time for this week. Like and subscribe. Come see us over on Gab. Nice crew and the Cold Fury blog. And I'll see you on the next episode.